Quantic Dream is the studio behind Heavy Rain, a game I railed on for 18 minutes. You might expect them to be shut down after how abysmal Heavy Rain ended up being, but they in fact received critical and commercial success with that abomination, so they ended up making more games. One of these is Detroit Become Human, which I compared to Heavy Rain a lot in that review, saying that I really enjoyed the game, and I'll get to that one eventually, but in the meantime I think it best to review the game that came in between, the weird middle child of the studio, Beyond Two Souls. Will it be on the Detroit side or Heavy Rain side in quality? Let's see. The beginning showcases through cutscenes only how impressive of a step up it is from Quantic Dream's previous outing. The story isn't an immediate masterpiece, as I think none are, but rather the facial animations, voice acting, and character models in general are much more visually appealing and don't look like robotic stick figures. One notable thing is that the game has only one playable character, Jodie. She and her magical entity known as Aiden are actually interesting and well-played characters. Well, Aiden can't speak and is just really a power, but regardless is an interesting idea. The idea of a character with magical powers is definitely not unique, but being able to play as said power is actually very intriguing. Though not exciting at the very start, my hunger for action that preceded playing Heavy Rain was fulfilled over multiple mechanics. The mechanics of Aiden being able to move things, cause havoc, and possess humans were a large part in that, and I must commend the team for actually making it fun to control and interact with. Another mechanic that made me enjoyful was, get ready for it, walking. Yes, walking. For those of you unfamiliar with Heavy Rain, you have to hold R2 and steer with the stick in order to walk in that game. It's really bad, but here you can actually walk like a normal human being. Oh my god! One chapter at the start that stood out to me in particular was the party. Everything's normal at first. You get to talk to people, and the characters are well written and acted here, until Aiden's brought up. The characters force Jodie to use Aiden and are frightened by it, but still go on normally. Then, when one of the characters is upset at the gift she was given by Jodie, the action begins. They mistreat her and put her in a small area, which does make sense. Them disliking her makes these actions properly tied to the characters, but them burning her arm with a cigarette was a bit ridiculous for me, but regardless, it is an interesting scene to watch play out, and it was even more fun to get revenge on them with Aiden. Kill them all.
I said that's enough.
Ruin their lives. Cower in fear at my mighty power. The gameplay isn't particularly exciting at many moments, but the unraveling story plays a part in making that not such a big deal. The interview chapter, for example, is very lacking in true fun gameplay, but the way the game asks the player questions and Jodie reveals the answer through your dialogue options is a very interesting way of storytelling. In the original order of events, many things are not chronological, so stitching everything together based on clever clues adds another layer of fun and depth to the narrative. Though these additions wear thin over time, they still add quality to at least some parts of the game. At the end of each chapter, a percentage is shown. It depicts the choices you made, how many other options there were, and how many other players took that same path. It's an interesting mechanic that, while not as detailed and impressive as the flowchart from Detroit Become Human, is certainly better than Heavy Rain's method of simply not showing you what choices you made and if they actually mattered. The story isn't extremely complicated or unique in ideas, but it remains entertaining through and through, and it is carried by stellar performances and unique methods of telling and narrative. The gameplay as a whole is decent, as the stealth is quite well done, the unique QTEs are cool and not bad, but hard to get used to, and the normal Aiden segments range from being great to boring. The visuals and music are undeniably great, but the other two aspects are more nuanced, and that makes them require more detail. CIA training and running across a train are exciting, and I definitely had fun with them, but I continued to be underwhelmed when things weren't extremely flashy. Fine-tuning the game mechanics would go a long way in benefiting this experience. I felt a more interesting story would make me forgive a somewhat cliche premise here, but alas, it is an entertaining yet shallow story. Not every story has to be fine art, but I would have enjoyed a more artistic approach. Some parts in the story that took place when Jodie was a little girl started to bore me, but over time I started to see the somewhat interesting pattern of Aiden being a nuisance and a help to her. I did quite appreciate this, but I felt it could have been a little bit less subtle and more consistent. There was one scene that was able to get to me though, and it did make an impact on me. Due to how it didn't have to force itself to, the brilliance of this scene lied within its lack of confident and flamboyant spectacle. Here, take a look.
I just wanted to have some fun.
What did you do to that boy?
Philip.
I didn't do anything. Aiden did it. He was trying to defend me. He thought...
I'm sick and tired of your stories! Jodie, this time you're really gonna get it!
Now!
Some interesting puzzles are present, and overall the gameplay doesn't do a bad job of many things. But for newcomers and those not as open to story-driven games, it is definitely an issue. The one flaw within the graphical department is definitely cinematic black bars, which actually parallels to the Order 1886. I don't like these, but I'm not going to lose my mind over them, as just like many gameplay aspects, it's not egregious, just frustrating. The more you play, the more good stuff there is. Puzzles, QTEs, Aiden, and even some horror is present, which helps alleviate some other major flaws, specifically those with dialogue sequences and interactions, which I think must be much smoother. Once again, good and bad things are present in both story and gameplay here. Some things feel a bit forced, like when you're forced to break glass with a chair rather than with Aiden, but still, exciting horror and entertaining plot comfort worries about this game. So, why do you think that people on Metacritic gave this game nearly 20 fewer points than Heavy Rain? Well, I don't know. Maybe just because people are the stupidest they've ever been on Metacritic. Multiple times there were objectives without clear landmarks to go to, often leaving me in confusion. I feel like this kind of game shouldn't require a walkthrough, so I was frustrated with the lack of some sort of substitute for the scanner in Detroit. I felt as if maybe they could use Aiden to make your goals more clear and thus open up the design a bit more. Many things could have easily been added to help this game. I felt like many times what I did, and if I failed or succeeded at tasks, made no difference, but the well-written characters are enough to build a solid linear story. I would like it if those characters were in a more open narrative, but it still does a good job. I felt like I was watching things and not making decisive impacts on the characters, which made this style of gameplay feel less justified than in a game like Detroit, where your choices have a huge impact. Through the latter part of the gameplay is fun. Fighting demons, running around, possessing people. It's all well done through the second chunk alongside most of the story. But when the gameplay combines with the story, it's where the game falls flat. Giving the player more choices and fun dialogue scenes would be very helpful in ensuring good gameplay, good story, and a good combination. Something that Detroit knocked out of the park. Chapters like Homeless and The Condenser are fantastic and action-packed. A lot of things are in favor of the experience here, but sometimes the game gets ahead of itself and gets to be a bit cringy. Nowhere near Heavy Rain, but still pretty bad at some points. I felt attached to most of the characters, though, which was, once again, enough to entertain me. But again, I felt like a more profound set of themes could make this story a masterpiece. More specifically on the topic of the music, it is tense, well composed, and fits the scenes well. The graphics are incredibly impressive for the time, and different areas can look extremely unique. They did a great job in both these areas, which definitely helps the game's overall quality. In this game, the story mostly exclusively changes based on your actions from chapter to chapter, and thus there's barely any link from what you do at the start and what occurs later. This takes away a lot of the unique attributes that Detroit had, and while I, once again, do like a lot of what the story does, having those choices impact everything around you is much more satisfying and much more interesting than just watching very similar things play out, especially for those wanting to replay the game. The stories within these chapters are often fantastic little vignettes, but the game often feels like multiple different games stitched together. Some sections open up a lot and are absolutely massive, and while these are fun to explore, they're mostly void of any interesting things to find, and there's a fair amount of graphical pop in here. There's a variety, not only in set pieces, but in every chapter. Though it makes the game feel somewhat disconnected, I don't think I've ever banished an evil Navajo spirit, shut down a terminal to evil entities, helped deliver a baby, and infiltrated the third world country in the same game before. Unique, but lost is how I would describe the impact of the constantly changing story here. Overall, I wanted more cool dialogue options, more amazing gameplay, more great story, and less sitting and watching things, less feeling I had no impact on the game as a whole, and fewer boring filler chapters. The story, gameplay, music, and visuals as a whole are fantastic, but when it goes on for too long or combines gameplay and story in a lazy fashion, it fails. I was extremely satisfied with the great characters, fun gameplay, beautiful ending message, and certain chapters that were outstanding, but I felt some things held it back from being perfect. 3.5 out of 5 is a fair score for this very good game that misses out on a higher status by not going all the way on a narrative with choices.